Wii Sports. Widely regarded as one of, if not the greatest pack-in title of all time, it sits in the pantheon of high art, riding alongside the Mona Lisa and the Jackson 5. Realistically speaking, it's nothing more than a glorified proof of concept, showing the fun to be had with the Wii Remote and simultaneously showing how little it can realistically do. 5 sports ranging from blisteringly simple to average levels of simple, where it lacked technical depth that made up for inaccessibility, which is exactly what it needed to do. For the select few who wanted something more, there were a handful of challenge modes that tested your mettle and added a new layer of replayability. It was a social phenomenon to be sure, but realistically it was still just a minigame collection. And what makes a minigame collection better? Killing each other, of course. Wii Sports Resort is in every way a step up. More sports, more variants of said sports. You can fly a gosh dang plane for heaven's sakes. They pulled out all the stops here, adding more content and polishing the product to a T. Then, radio silence. Technically, there was a Wii U Sports, but I'm convinced not a single person ever played it. For a proper sequel on a console that wasn't a squealing pig with its toes cut off, we'd have to wait for Nintendo Switch Sports, announced a few months back and released just recently. It showed promise. There were less games than Resort, but that's by no means a deal breaker. What we were shown looked solid. Unfortunately, sometimes what you see is all you get. Nintendo Switch Sports is kind of a mess. Technically sound, but frustratingly shallow, something the Wii Sports games did a great job narrowly avoiding. Nintendo has had a lot of complaints and insults thrown at them this console generation, many of which have spawned from the blind loyalty of these fans themselves. Complain all you want about 3 ROMs being sold for $60, you probably bought it anyway. And people have the right to complain about whatever they want, but don't pretend Nintendo's gonna change if you keep acting like a freaking shill. On the flip side, there are people who think of Nintendo as a god who can do no wrong, playing the apologist for every one of their shitty anti-consumer business practices. As for me, I don't really care what price a game runs. What matters is the enjoyment and the time I'll be able to get out of it. I don't mind paying $60 for 3 old Mario games because I hate running my own emulators and I don't even own Sunshine to begin with. It's a huge convenience for me having 3 great games on the same cartridge. Skyward Sword HD was questionably priced at $60, but the devs really did go above and beyond to take the Wii original and improve on nearly every aspect. Despite my habit of naturally assuming the best in one's intentions, there are definitely some recent examples of Nintendo clearly cutting corners and/or heavily rushing games to market, evident by their severe lack of any real content. ARMS felt like an arcade game tossed onto consoles with no care given to its potential legacy. Mario sports games have struggled to stay relevant past their release month, a result of their meager content and promise of future improvements implying it's an unfinished product. These aren't necessarily bad games at their core, just products that feel woefully undercooked when you look past the solid fundamentals. And as much as I hate to say it, Nintendo Switch Sports definitely falls into that latter category, with very little to offer in the way of real engaging content past the proof of concepts. The thing that made Wii Sports so great is that its simplicity hit home the concept of Wii's motion controls, showing us its potential through games we all know and love. Once that potential had been properly cemented, Wii Sports Resort went crazy with the concepts and delivered a far more complete package that was actually worth purchasing as a standalone product. The Nintendo Switch is in its 6th year already, and for as pitiful as a product as it was, we already have a game that clearly displays what the Joy-Con tech can do. The Switch was never aiming to be a console for every member of the family, so a game that brought every type of person under one simple but fun roof isn't really necessary. So the only reason Switch Sports has to exist is to recreate that feeling everyone had playing their Wii for the first time. It's banking off of nostalgia, which is one slippery slope if that nail isn't hit directly on the head. Right out of the gate, things were kind of confusing as they seemingly replaced Mii's with these brand new avatars, but not fully replaced them. It seemed like they were playing it super safe. But that's not to say the concept wasn't alluring. Wii Sports was simple and lacked real depth, but there was still a lot of fun to be found working on your timing in order to slowly build that career into the pro category. There was definitely a reason to keep playing the titles for more than just a day or two. Switch Sports doesn't really have that. Let's talk about why. Bowling was the star of the show in Wii Sports, so it was a no-brainer to bring it back. And simply put, bowling still feels great. The fundamentals are intact. It's easy to learn and find a strategy that fits your personal touch, but it's not going to hand out a perfect game without some serious elbow grease. The vibe is mellow, the bowling alley looks and sounds great. There's only so much I can say about something over 100 million people have experienced. I get to play a chill game with my family. It's cool. Tennis also returns and has definitely seen a facelift. Tennis was a personal favorite of mine in Wii Sports, so it's nice to see it return here with a far less mindless feel. Instead of waving your racket around like a brain-dead monkey on bath salts, you actually have to time your swings. Imagine that, right? There's a really good rhythm to matches here, but if the shots align, your front player has the ability to disrupt that flow and toss the timing completely off. Potentially in your favor, potentially not. I'd still say it's the most simple of the 6 sports present here, but it's definitely fun. Now here's where things get kinda weird. Badminton is a new sport, and while its fundamentals do differ from tennis, I can't help but feel like it's a very redundant choice. In real life, tennis and badminton are deeply different sports that require a very different skill set. But at face value, you hit a thing over a net with a racket. And considering how these Nintendo sports games rarely delve into technical play, they feel very similar. The court is much smaller and the camera is closer to your character, which at least creates the illusion of differentiation. You have the choice to drop shot in order to hit the shuttlecock right up against the net. If your opponent is caught in the back of the court, then a drop shot can end the volley instantly. It's very important. Everything here is timing, as a hit that doesn't quite connect properly leaves you open for a debilitating spike right down to the floor. It's fun, no doubt, and I don't dislike the overall feel, but I will say that on occasions the racket just doesn't swing, making me drop the volley for a reason, I guess. I don't know, it seemed like I was doing fine here. It feels less refined than other game modes, and considering how simple things are, that is definitely a problem. I think the fundamental gameplay loop is satisfying enough to warrant a spot on this roster, but 1/3 of them being racket sports is just an odd choice. Next up is volleyball, probably my favorite team-based sport, because when the bump, set, and spike all line up, it is so satisfying to see that ball blast right past the unexpected opponents. Victory here is not entirely up to you, as the whole sport is a back and forth between another person who is prone to messing up just as much as you. But I think that gives this mode a really unique identity within this lineup of games. The sound effects and animations are on point, the variety of different hand movements give it a slightly more frenetic feel, though I do doubt the necessity of them. This one is an absolute hit, though once again, it's a net sport that makes 3 of 6. What the hell? It's like if I went to the mall, punched 6 people, and 3 of them were kids. Caramba is a far more methodical, punchy reimagining of the sword duels from Wii Sports Resort. This was one I saw quite a bit of hype surrounding, and while it's not my favorite, it is well done. The back and forth of blocking and striking at the perfect time feels great, especially when you consider that in many cases back in the Wii, your best bet was to just swing your arms around like a deranged psycho. The inclusion of 3 playstyles is also a welcome one, providing just a touch of depth to the strategy. You got well-rounded and powerful strikes, a defense-based charging sword, and a speedy but harder to manage dual wield that is most likely very broken at a competitive level. If there is one, I guess. It feels good, looks good, it's good. Then we get to the one sport I genuinely think is bad, and it's the one I was looking forward to the most. Soccer. So from a gameplay standpoint, soccer is really similar to Rocket League, except now you have 2 legs to kick with, a pass feature, and an incredibly unpredictable headbutt. Overall, the physics in this ball just feel incredibly wrong, leading to poor execution of offensive maneuvers, and in some cases, accidental own goals. What? I'd be able to forgive this if the movement didn't also feel incredibly bad. This is the only game of the bunch where movement is completely in the player's hands, but for some reason you move so slowly that the pace of the game is like playing foosball submerged in molasses. I've tried it, it's not as fun as it sounds. I really like the concept behind this sport, but it just feels incomplete, like a level of polish was unfortunately left on the cutting room floor, which wouldn't surprise me at all. You know that foot strap that's bundled in with the physical release of this game? It doesn't even have full compatibility with this mode. That's going to be added later. You also have to consider that a whole game mode, that being golf, isn't even in the game yet. It's being added at a later date. That's not all though. There's this customization system where playing matches will grant you points that will eventually reward you with new cosmetics for your character. Most of these are only compatible with the new avatars and not the Miis, which makes sense. I'm not going to dock any points there. These items are obtained randomly from a pool. However, it's not really gambling since I don't believe they can be obtained twice, nor are there hidden pull rates or any shit like that. This is a cool incentive to keep you coming back every time a new list of items is made available for a limited time. And I appreciate they didn't try to shoehorn microtransactions into the system. That would have been terrible. Oh my god. For once, Nintendo's taken the high road. However, I feel this system alone is not enough to keep players engaged and consistently hopping on, and unfortunately this is the only incentive I see. For some reason they lock this system to the online mode, meaning couch co-op and family time is not going to reward you with anything at all. There is some sort of ranking system, but I don't really see this game being a specifically compelling competitive experience, given the general simplicity of the sports themselves. For some reason, most of the extra content that made the original Wii Sports titles so replayable is simply gone. Those challenge modes wiped off the face of Spoko Square. Spoko Square? Spachosquer. The career system has also been cut. This in particular really bothers me because it couldn't have been hard to implement, right? It's just a number in a line graph. But it would have made such a difference when it comes to the offline replayability, because as it stands, there's really nothing at all. All you have to keep going as a casual player is cosmetics, which mind you, there are not a lot of. If Nintendo is gearing up to replace Mii's with something more visually appealing, then they gotta try harder than the handful of faces and hairstyles. At least implement a gender option so I can tell what's intended as a male or female piece of clothing. That is a major nitpick, actually. There are a few alternative modes to try, but they aren't as robust or seamlessly built into the experience as they were before. There's an obstacle challenge mode for bowling, which is a neat little distraction, but it still takes place in the same bowling alley with the same sound effects and backing track. It feels very haphazardly implemented, to be honest. There's a shootout mode for soccer, which I'll admit, I haven't even tried it, but there's nothing for badminton, volleyball, or champiera. It kinda just feels like wasted potential, and that's kinda how I describe this whole game. For the most part, it's mechanically sound and is fun to play, but it lacks any real substance outside of the online, which is super disappointing. At this point in time, the game isn't even finished. I'm not sure why this game released in the state it did. I always hesitate to play the lazy card because games take a well-coordinated team of hardworking developers to ever get past the conceptualization, and I don't feel like this game set out with the intent to be bad. There's definitely some care put into this wonky-ass package. What I definitely do believe, though, is that this game would have greatly benefited from a few more months of development. It could have released in a complete state with more subsystems and levels of polish implemented, but Nintendo needed something to release this spring, so I guess that was out of the question. Now, this game is clearly one that has the potential to be a long-running title with tons of new cosmetic updates and even, dare I say, real content? More sports outside of golf, a proper career mode, and possibly even 100-pin bowling. As it stands, Nintendo Switch Sports is fun, but incredibly shallow, and I'm assuming that's because it was rushed to market. If we're talking sheer width of content here, the Wii Pack-In title dwarfs this 2022 release, and it definitely isn't worth $50. As a wise Miyamoto once said, a rushed game will always be bad, but what's most important is the Mets. Baby, love the Mets. Alright, baby, let's go get a home run, baby, love the Mets. Let's go.